Hello and welcome to Fact vs. Fiction, where we explore the world of disinformation, how it spreads, and the tools we can use to navigate it. I'm your host, Pratham Gore, and today I'm thrilled to have Brandon O'Callaghan, Associate Lecturer in Griffith College specializing in media and new media with us. Professor Brandon has extensive experience in studying misinformation, disinformation, and its impact on society. And he is going to share some invaluable insights with us today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor Brandon. How are
You're
you?
welcome. I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
To start off, could you briefly explain with what disinformation is and how it differs from misinformation?
Yeah, well, the distinction is important, and people do tend to confuse the two terms. But the clue is in the initials. Misinformation is information given mistakenly. It's incorrect information, but it is not forwarded to somebody with the deliberate intent to confuse or to, indeed, to ultimately to do harm. Disinformation, on the other hand, is deliberate, the clue being D for disinformation and D for deliberate. So it's deliberately false content shared with the intention to mislead or to manipulate or to influence people's opinions or behavior. And it could be for political reasons, it could be financial reasons, it could be reasons of ideology. So misinformation, I think we could dispense with because it's always been out there. People can misinform somebody unintentionally, online or offline. It's not intended. It's human nature. We make mistakes. The real problem, of course, is disinformation, as I think we'll discover as we progress with our discussion.
That's really insightful. So it sounds like misinformation is often spread unintentionally, while disinformation is more calculated. Can you dive a
Yeah,
bit deeper into why often people make uh, mistakes or get confused into, even though they have very different motives behind them?
well, people mis identify one and the other, but I don't think that in and of itself is important. The problem is the distribution or the spread of a potentially harmful information, and that's what we call disinformation. Calling it misinformation doesn't necessarily make the problem worse. So, people confuse it because they confuse terminologies right across the whole gamut of language. But the real problem is the existence of disinformation. It is important to name it correctly. Why people confuse it could be for very many different reasons, but the real issue is identifying and combating disinformation.
Perfect. Moving on, why do you think people continue to believe in misinformation even when they have access to the truth? Is there something in our psychology that makes us more likely to fall for false information?
Unfortunately, I think there probably is. In the digital age, people are bombarded with information. I mean, we're online so often, so much of our daily lives are taken up online. And there is such a mass of very often useful information, but very often not so useful or harmful information. So we're bombarded all the time. We don't always analyze it for for its plausibility or whatever. Also, it's dramatic. Disinformation can be very dramatic, and that can attract attention much more quickly than the reality. The reality can be very mundane and not as dramatic, but very often disinformation is presented in a very dramatic way. Hence, it will get more likes, more attention, and consequently, more people will believe it. Also, we tend to accept information that aligns with our worldview. So if we set out beginning to believe that, for instance, just to take one example, that imbibing bleach, that by drinking bleach we can cure ourselves of COVID, which is clearly
Mhm.
a very, very dangerous thing. But if that aligns with some kind of belief that the medical professions and the drug companies are all corrupt, who knows? Maybe we will accept that. That's probably a very exaggerated or extreme example. But there are psychological reasons. I mean, this relatively new term, confirmation bias, we tend to
Mm.
have our existing beliefs confirmed when we uh, are exposed to disinformation, depending on our own disposition. Also, there's the sheer repetition of it. If something's repeated often enough, very often we become more accepting of it. I'm talking now in general. I'm not talking about myself or yourself, Pratham. I'm sure we're
Yeah,
much more discerning.
yeah.
Also, we tend to rationalize what we want to believe. There's a certain tendency, I think, with attention spans getting shorter and shorter. That's what the research would indicate, that rather than thinking critically, we tend to just process information and ideas very fast rather than evaluating at length. So there are a number of dynamics involved in this, and our brains are wired for efficiency more than for accuracy. Again, experts have indicated this. So we tend to make quick decisions. Um, and really that can often lead to, maybe accepting or absorbing disinformation more readily.
Oh, so it's a combination of both emotional appeal and our cognitive biases that makes misinformation so sticky. Uh,
Disinformation, yeah.
yeah, that really explains why some hoaxes spread like wildfire. Like, what role do you think confirmation bias plays in all of this? Do you think it's the primary reason that we accept disinformation so easily?
uh, well, it's often very emotionally charged. It's always in headlines, and there's very little in depth because it's false. It lends itself to a very dramatic headline rather than any in-depth scrutiny, which would show it up as false. I'm generalizing.
Yeah.
Um, and it tends to spread from peer to peer, from person to person on social media. I mean, everything goes viral on social media. Most things are going viral, particularly a dramatic headline that tends to be disinformation. And also, there tends to be a coordinated campaign behind the spread of disinformation. There's an old expression that lies travel around the world quicker than the truth can catch up with them. And that's especially true with social media and the online world, where information is transmitted at such hugely rapid pace that it's very hard to catch up with the lies that are being spread online.
Oh, yeah. That's so true. That lies travel faster than truth. And then let's talk about how disinformation spreads. Like social media has played a huge role in amplifying fake news. And how do you think social media algorithms contribute to the problem?
Yeah, the algorithms tend to, well, they get a lot of the blame, but I think rightfully so to a great extent. Algorithms look for engagement. Algorithms are attracted by engagement. The more people that are engaged, rather than, if you like, accuracy. Algorithms aren't really set up for the most part to
Yeah.
ensure accuracy. Algorithms promote more and more engagement, so it snowballs. The more likes, the more
Mm.
it engages with that. Um, Also, content that is provoking those strong reactions, those likes, they're boosted by the algorithm. So it's a self-fulfilling technology. It keeps generating more and more, a privileging more and more. Information is getting a lot of likes, a lot of engagement. That's the way algorithms are set up primarily. Again, I'm for the most part generalizing, but primarily so.
Mhm.
And then you have the creation of these echo chambers where people are constantly hearing the same things over and over because the algorithms are ensuring that the more engagement there is, the more they will promote the disinformation. So these platforms aren't designed to show the truth. They're designed to keep you scrolling and liking and engaging with the platform itself. So it's brilliant in its conception in terms of how it can successfully promote disinformation. It's not necessarily set up to do that, but that is the way it is. It could not have been designed better to promote disinformation. So it's a perfect storm, if you will, in terms of how it functions and the outcomes.
But that's really interesting. And it's crazy how these platforms reward engagement. even if it's with misleading content. So do you think like social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter have responsibility to prevent disinformation from spreading? What more can they do to avoid?
Well, this has been debated and discussed over and over. The social media platforms are making huge profits from
Mhm.
all of their activities, and that includes, of course, disinformation. And none of them have, in any credible way, come up with policies or tactics or strategies to deal with disinformation. So, they have a responsibility. They have a huge societal impact. They make huge profits, and they are they're reluctant to be transparent about how they moderate content and how they use algorithms for the amplification of content. So there needs to be more activity around flagging false content. They're not doing that sufficiently at all. There needs to be more
Mhm.
investment in what's called content moderation and fact checking and algorithmic transparency. We don't know what way the algorithms are precisely set up. The vast majority of us, some people do, of course, because they're working on them, but we don't really know. The average user, I've no idea. I just know that they're designed not with my interests at heart, but the self-interest of the platforms. So I think regulation is key here. Also, greater, if you like, media literacy, greater knowledge. So yeah, at the beginning, the social media platforms need to be held to account, and we haven't really come up with a means of doing that adequately as of yet.
Well, we've seen disinformation have some serious consequences, especially in political situations. What do you think the most significant real world consequences of disinformation? And could you give us an example of that, if possible?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of well-known examples, both internationally and here in Ireland. The oft mentioned January 6th was it 2020 when the Capitol Hill in Washington, the riots there, they were partially fueled by election disinformation, this myth that the election was rigged or indeed stolen by the Democrats in the form of Joe Biden, resulted in deaths. The death of a policeman at the hands of the rioters. They were subsequently convicted and then, of course, pardoned by President Trump, bizarrely. Here in Ireland, we had the riots on Parnell Street after the unfortunate, tragic stabbing incident on Parnell Square some
Yeah.
years ago. I'm sure you and our listeners will remember that. Again,
Mm.
fueled at least partly, if not substantially, by disinformation online. The hero of the situation was an immigrant
Mhm.
who saved lives on that day, but the disinformation was all anti-immigrant and placing blame where it didn't belong. These are just examples, if you like, political in the widest sense. But then there
Mhm.
are areas like public health. During COVID, so many false claims about vaccines being harmful, about things like bleach. I mentioned before, Donald Trump
Yeah.
suggesting the ingestment of bleach would false cures, vaccine hoaxes, and denialism. So there are huge issues around public health as well as politics and democracy. Um, and they're unfolding as we speak. And there's no reason to believe, unfortunately, that that's going to decrease anytime soon. We've a presidential election here coming up later this year. I'll be keeping a close eye on how that plays out online, the social media in terms of disinformation. But it's something that's live, it's happening all the time, and it's not difficult to pinpoint areas where it has had harmful effects on society.
So all of this really shows how deeply disinformation can affect not just public opinion, but even personal safety of people. Can you talk a little more about disinformation, has how it has affected the public trust in institutions like government and media? And is there a way to repair the trust?
Yeah, well, We can see that, and studies have borne this out, that disinformation breeds, if you will, cynicism and distrust in government and the media. Now, both government and the media have their flaws and their faults, but nevertheless, as the expression goes, they're still the best things we have in terms of promoting a healthy democracy. Also,
Mm.
trust in medical science has been harmed by disinformation. So this incipient cynicism is very harmful. And, you know, trust in government, trust in media, trust in democracy generally, and those aspects or institutions of democracy that underpin it have been harmed by this. Once that trust is eroded, it's very easy for people spreading disinformation to manipulate or divide the public, weakens our ability to make informed, mature decisions, which are essential for democracy. Not necessarily just at the level of choosing somebody to vote for, but all of those activities in our lives that are governed by a healthy democracy. As I mentioned, the health service, a public services, a all that, the media playing a crucial role. So also voter suppression, false rumors on election day about, you need to bring a passport with you to vote. Well, you don't, and
Mm.
many people were put off when this disinformation was sent around social media. So there's just so much happening. It's harmful. It's deliberately so, and it has affected trust in institutions, and it can be very difficult to restore that, unfortunately.
No doubt. Now let's shift gears a bit. And now that we have understood the problem, what are the best tools and techniques that individuals can use to verify the information and they can come across online?
Well, I suppose there are a number of strategies we could look at, mostly in their early days. We don't know. There's no golden solution. There's no single answer that can address this any more than there is in terms of gossip and rumors in the real world. We have it all online. I think at the level of younger people, a media literacy at the level of schools, I think initiatives in the education system would be very useful to build up a kind of a better ability to discern fact from fiction. Of course, we all get fooled occasionally, but to be a little bit more a I'm trying to think of a positive word that we evaluate better critically, that our
Mm.
critical faculty is more mature and better developed in terms of spotting disinformation, because a lot of us can spot it fairly quickly because a lot of it is so far out that we know straight away what it is and we can take it for what it is. So certain initiatives in the education system would be useful. Also, there are digital tools and websites that can be useful for fact checking. Snoops or Snopes.com,
Mhm.
factcheck.org. There are various initiatives online that can help to mitigate to some degree the impact. But we're in very early days in terms of all of this. We need to check sources. Are the sources reputable? Educating people in this area, education information can help a counter disinformation. Watching for red flags. If everything is emotionally articulated, that can be a red flag that there's something here that could be in the form of disinformation, lack of evidence to back up statements. So again, we need to just be, I suppose, cuter and more aware of the situation and just develop the skills necessary. But very early days, and we do need to work more on coming up with solutions.
Great. I've heard of reverse image search as well, but cross-referencing sources is something that's often overlooked by people. What are some credible sources people should cross-reference to ensure the information is more reliable to them?
Credible, could you repeat that?
Yeah. What are some credible sources people should cross-reference to ensure the information is more reliable?
Well, I mentioned some digital websites and tools,
Mm-hmm.
snopes.com, factcheck.org.
Fact.
There are a number of them, and you could Google to find them. PolitiFact is another. A Dublin City University have an initiative off the top of my head. I can't recall the name of it, but again, if you Googled DCU or Dublin City University and media facts or
Mm-hmm.
disinformation, you'll access stuff there. Um, Again, we need to familiarize ourselves with these, but those are just some examples. And a lot of them are in early stages of development, but they're there and they will continue to be there, and hopefully people will be utilizing them.
Well, let's hope people are well aware of what's going on around them. And moving on is media literacy. Like media literacy is something that seems to be more important than ever. And how can people improve their ability to spot fake news and become more media literate?
Well, I suppose there are a number of things. I mean, slowing down, everything happens quickly online. The texts are short, long form prose online, where we would read a long article and assess the arguments in the article. That doesn't happen anything like as often as it should. So we need to slow down. We need to not share content immediately. We need to evaluate, take our time. We need to diversify our sources. People tend to occupy these echo chambers where their bias confirmation is constantly upheld. We need to put our toe in the water to a much wider extent. We shouldn't be getting our information from single sources, even reputable sources. It's always good to hear another side of an argument. So I go to credible media outlets on a daily basis, but I look for media outlets that would have different ideological perspectives. They're both credible, they're both authoritative, they're both well intentioned, but they're giving their take on it. And I think that's important that we read more than one a side of the coin, so to speak, and see what other people are saying. We need to use these credible fact checkers I mentioned. Need to learn the difference between opinion and news. News reported as fact, and then opinion. Both of these things are valuable, but opinion needs to be seen as that. It's subjective, and we need to be critical around it and deciding what is there that is credible. Also, satire. There's a lot of satire online. Satire is a very healthy thing. Satire is making fun of powerful people and institutions.
Mhm.
Sometimes people take it as fact. Need to be careful. That's not to criticize satire. And media literacy courses, uh, which are very early stages of development, I'd be the first to admit, but increasingly people need to be at least aware of these media literacy courses. There are many initiatives around that, MediaWise being one, News Literacy Project another. So the various steps, they're all small steps in and of themselves, but it could be small steps initially before we can really tackle disinformation to the level we need to.
Yeah, that's so correct. And those are like some great tips. And it sounds like it's really about developing a healthy skepticism towards everything we see online. And what about people who might be susceptible to fake news because of their social circles or echo chambers, if that makes sense? And how can they break out of that?
Well, it's a great expression you used, healthy skepticism. I think
Hmm.
that's really important, probably in every aspect of our lives, but most particularly online. People are more prone to um, being falling for disinformation.
Yeah.
I don't know. Some people. I probably sound a little bit negative, but some people we cannot
No?
help. And
Yeah.
again, I mean, disinformation that people accept very often because it confirms their own biases anyway.
Hmm.
And if you're perhaps racist, well, you're just getting information that you want, even though it's false. A, I think a lot of those initiatives for people who are susceptible need to take place offline. I'm not
Hmm.
sure what you can do about that. Cannot force people to undertake initiatives. But I suppose at the level of minors, people under 18, yes, parental guidance, parental interventions, and also educational at the level of schools. I think there's a
Mhm.
strong argument for a module on
Yeah.
secondary level schools for 15, 16-year-olds to take media literacy, online media literacy modules that would address this issue and promote what you well described as a healthy skepticism. We need more of healthy skepticism in society, not less. Um, so I suppose the most positive thing I could say in answer to your question is that
Mhm.
it needs to happen at the level of schools. I think that's where the most
Schools.
value can be done.
And the very next question is exactly how you ended the last one. What role do you think education plays in combating disinformation, especially among younger generations?
Yeah, well, education is the key, really, to so many things, and certainly to this. Um, we we can't educate people as to what they think, but we can
Yeah.
educate people about how they think, how they develop a critique and a critical faculty and a healthy skepticism. So critical thinking and digital literacy, it needs to start early and needs to be integrated, perhaps even not in a standalone a module on that, but perhaps integrated in so many a subjects. History, for instance, history is a very contested area. That
Yeah.
would be a good example of where you could bring in this idea of healthy skepticism and critical faculty, also in terms of the sciences.
Mhm.
So, developing this can be brought in at various levels in schools and indeed continuing into university. The encouragement of debate. Debate is great. Skepticism is great. Respectful dialogue. Certainly, at the level of debates where you would challenge maybe students to, you'd have a motion that this,
Mhm.
that we support the reduction of the voting age to 13 years of age. That sounds
Mhm.
extreme, but get people to debate that. And people who disagree with it, ask them to debate in favor of it, and vice versa. So people are constantly arguing, not just with their friends and colleagues. When I say argue, I mean debate and discuss, but even with themselves. Self interrogation is very important here because we can argue among each other and maybe learn a little. Perhaps sometimes we need to interrogate ourselves, our own thoughts on things, and see do they really measure up to our own values. Very often we adopt an attitude to something without maybe giving it the proper critical interrogation it deserves and that we deserve. And we adopt an attitude or a stance around some important issue in society and don't critically engage with it enough. So I think we constantly need to a debate with ourselves, not just with our peers, friends, family, but also with ourselves, constantly checking, is this my view now? Because I know much more about this topic than I did at the outset. So
Mhm.
that we are developing all the time. And then when we
Yeah.
see stuff online that might be dramatic and new, we're well able to absorb it, process it, and decide for ourselves in a mature, educated way whether that might be disinformation, whether it's credible or not credible. And that's the important outcome, I would imagine.
And education really seems like the key to a long-term solution for this. And do you think schools and universities should be incorporating media literacy as a part of their core curriculum? And if yes, how?
Well, yes, is the simple answer. How is perhaps for educators in those areas? I don't want to go back on much of what I said because some of what we were
Hmm.
talking about hinged on this, but certainly at the level
Yeah.
of debate. We need more debate and discussion. When you're online on social media, you tend to be on your own, could be in your bedroom,
Hmm.
staring at a laptop or a tablet, and you're just consuming. You're consuming stuff
Yeah.
online. You're not hearing. You're reading. You're not hearing, and you're not corresponding. You're not communicating. There's no dialogue really. Okay, you might be typing up some responses, but they're very, very limited in their a and certainly in their length because everything has to be in shorthand. There's no real scope to engage in a proper widespread discussion. I find students increasingly find it new and novel, the idea of a debate in class, and that's a pity.
Mhm.
There should be more debate at primary and secondary level schools. So yeah, developing media literacy is key, education is key, curiosity is key. People should be curious, not just convinced. Can be convinced about something, but remain curious. Look at other
Yeah.
arguments, listen to the other side, develop, analyze, critique, and then you can form whatever it could be. It could be something that I personally would be utterly opposed to, but you'll at least come to a mature, relatively intelligent a attitude or belief. And people are entitled to their views, they're entitled to their opinions. We don't all agree. That's a healthy society. So don't just be convinced. Stay curious and self-interrogate.
Great advice. It's all about taking a little extra time to verify before sharing. And are there any resources like books, websites, or documentaries that you'd recommend to people who want to learn more about disinformation and how to fight it?
Again, I mentioned some. I mentioned those websites. Books, I'm not so sure. Again, you'd be as capable as me of finding them online, Google. There are many initiatives, websites. A lot of universities have initiatives in the area. So I don't have any to share with you, but they're there, and the child, it'd be a good idea for people to go and search for those themselves as part of their learning process. I wouldn't like to determine that they're A, B, C, D, E. Go and find. I would say to people, go find them yourself
Mhm.
and start that learning journey.
Thank you so much for being here today, Professor Brendan. It's been an incredibly insightful discussion with you. For our listeners, make sure to follow along with our episodes and take the time to start fact checking the information you see online. And remember, the more you learn, the more empowered you become to spot disinformation and stop its spread. Thank you again, and all of our listeners, stay tuned for the next episode and keep verifying the facts.